Sawa Oahu, Naine, Arthur Richards. For our greeting today, we're going to count to 3 in Numa Yoraha. On the count of 3, everybody yell, Manahu crew. Manahu means hello. Ready? Suma, Waha, Pahi, Manahu.
And what does it mean to have equal education for all? Doesn't everybody have to go to school? But up these steps into this school, in 1923, Alice Piper and 6 of her friends could not come to school. So without further ado, I will bring us to the 4th grade crew honoring our Paiute language.
Manahu. Inaniane Laurelie Mares. I teach 4th grade here at Big Pine School, and as many of you know, each year 4th grade embarks on a learning expedition in which we study the Paiute culture as the first people to live in the Owens Valley. Part of that study includes effort to preserve the Paiute language that was in history suppressed to near extinction. For the past 7 years, local community member Glenn Nelson volunteers his time several times a year to teach the students Numa words. He tells oral stories, he invites the students to speak, and he plays fun games with them. Over the years, our goal has evolved so that the students become the teachers. This year in class, we built a dictionary that the students will take home with them. We built a word wall in class for quick reference, which they often did. They labeled things around the classroom like window, light, table, etc. At a community meeting earlier in the year, the students taught the kindergarten through 6th grade students how to greet one another, including how are you, Hani'idua'u, and I am well, Nu Sawadu. We continue to use that greeting in our classroom crew each day. They greeted families at their first SLC and taught them numbers at their second SLC. In crew, we described the weather, and when I was really on my game, I gave them commands like listen and line up. Just last Thursday at our celebration of learning, each student chose a category of words they wanted to teach community members, including plant names, animals, places. They set a personal goal for oral presentation using a rubric, and they took a lot of pride in their work. Today, they would like to share just a small piece of that work with you, and they ask that you participate. Big Pine 4th grade.
Manahu, Nani, and A. Jaden. I'm going to teach you the word for thunder. Also, thunder is the name of our crew. Say Tongo Yagari.
Tongo Yagari.
Again, Tongo Yagari.
Tongo Yagari.
Manahu.
Manahu, Nani, and A. Cameron. I'll be teaching you the Paiute word for Big Pine. And I put this word because it's our name of our town. Say Tokuomatu.
Tokuomatu.
Again, Tokuomatu.
Tokuomatu.
Manahu. Manahu, Nani, and I'm going to teach you the word for brother in Paiute language. I chose this word because it's a common word they use. Say Pia.
Pia.
Again, Pia.
Pia.
Manahu, Nani, and Katori. I'm going to teach you the Paiute word for coyote. Say Isha.
Isha.
Again, Isha.
Isha.
The reason I picked this word is because it's a lot of Paiute oral for it. Manahu, Nani, and Stephanie. I'm going to teach you the word for Indian tea. Because the Paiute people used to use it a lot and we still do. Say Terapi. Again, Terapi. Manahu. Manahu, Nani, and Noah, I'm going to be teaching you the word for petroglyph. Can you say Nimana Adumuina? Again, Nimana Adumuina. reason I picked this word is because it's a Native American dwelling near our area, Manahobu. I will be teaching you the number 10 because a lot of people are 10 years old. Can you guys say Sawano? Sawano. Again, Sawano? Sawano. Manahobu. Manahobu, Nani, and Ellen. Today I'll be teaching you the word head. I picked this word because that's how Alice Piper got a voice to get into the school. Say wolf. Wolf. Say it again. Wolf. Wolf.
Manahobu. Thank you, fourth grade crew. That was really delightful. And now I would like to invite Terry to come forward. This is Teresa McCarty, and she's done some research for us, and we're going to find out even more about Alice Piper. She's so happy to meet us, and we're so honored to have her here. She is a professor. She's a professor of American Indian Studies at UCLA, and she holds a position that's called a chair. It's called the G.F. Neller Chair. It's a really prestigious thing. She is a scholar in the true sense of the word, just like all of you are scholars, learning and researching. And then sometimes you have to present what you know to an audience, a new audience that you don't know. And that's what our scholar today is doing.
So scholars only show up with their books. Big Pine YouTubes that, to me, all of you are movie stars. I also want to thank former tribal chair Shannon Romero, and I'll talk about that connection in a little bit too. But I first approached Superintendent Jones and tribal chair Romero about 5 years ago when I stumbled into the Alice Piper story and learned about what you are doing here and this celebration. So 5 years ago, I was asked to give a talk in Washington, D.C. on the Brown v. Board decision in 1954, and I'm sure you know that Brown v. Board outlawed racial discrimination in public schools. When I was invited to give the lecture, I was overwhelmed by the thought of it, first of all. But I was also a little perplexed because Brown has been rendered as mostly a black-white, African-American white issue. And my work has been with Native Americans, and I was striving to see the connections there. And I read one piece about this, and a legal expert wrote, "The road taken by the Supreme Court in getting to Brown did not pass through Indian country." Well, that historian may have been, or that legal expert may have been partly right, but I think the Big Pine story, which I've come to know, says that Indian country, and in particular Paiute Shoshone country, definitely passed through Brown. But as I began preparing my remarks for this talk, I was ignorant of the Alice Piper story, the Alice Piper case. What I did know from my work with Native American communities, though, was that the overall argument in Brown that equality of education opportunity is necessary for any child to be successful in school and in life also resonated with the Native communities with whom I've been privileged to work. Those of us who work in Indian education also appreciate that in 1954, when the Supreme Court handed down its historic Brown ruling, thousands of Native American students still attended segregated Indian federal boarding schools. There's no mention of that in Brown. At the same time as the Brown ruling came down, Congress passed laws to terminate treaty and trust responsibilities with 106 Native American nations, giving legal cover to the federal government to seize 2.5 million more acres of Indian land. Brown doesn't mention that. But I also knew there's more to this story. The well-known and the hidden activism by Native people in this country, the Indian self-determination movement. And I went looking especially for these hidden stories of Native activism. I'm not sure where I first learned of Piper v. Big Pine. Perhaps it was from one of these books. I think the first mention of it I saw was in this book by Ojibwe scholar Brenda Child and Brian Klopatek called Indian Subjects. There's maybe a paragraph devoted to it. I later came across this book by historian Charles Wollenberg on segregation in California public schools. And I came across an article in Southern California Quarterly by an American Indian Studies scholar named Nicole Blaylock, who I believe has been here visiting. And so those were the sources that I had. But as I read about this case, I was struck by the almost identical language that the California Supreme Court justice, his name was Sewell, used in 1924 about the inequalities that was echoed in 1954 in the Brown case. And he talked about education being necessary for any child to succeed in school and in life. I was frankly blown away by the similarities between these two cases that were both brought by young girls of color. That is, Linda Brown and Alice Piper. And then I got on the internet and I found the treasure trove of videos, the Wikipedia article by Tim Steele, fundraising effort that everybody made. I met Superintendent Jones by video and Sage Romero, and I learned about the statue and the Alice Piper story. So much like the video, if you've seen it, the QA video on the Alice Piper story, I decided to ask some colleagues, do you know about this case? You know, I had been working in Indian education for years, and I didn't, and I wondered, do other people know about this case? So I reached out to esteemed colleagues, experts in Indian education, and only one knew something about the case. I then reached out to a law professor that I knew at the University of Arizona. He's a legal scholar of American Indian law, and his name is Robert Williams. And I asked him, "Can you tell me a little bit about this case?" Well, he hadn't heard of it either, but he used a law search engine, and he found 50 citations of the Alice Piper case, including in the Harvard and the Yale law reviews. And he wrote to me with great excitement. He said it was even cited in the 1976 Bakke case. So if you know that case, that was a case brought against the University of California that basically upheld affirmative action. So I think the point of this is that Alice Piper and the Piper v. Big Pine case did a lot for Native Americans, but also has made a difference for all of us, for all children who are able to attend public schools. So at this point I reached out to Superintendent Jones and I sent her an email just cold. And she responded right away. I asked, could you provide a local perspective on this? And she most graciously did. And she also then introduced me to Shannon Romero, whose beautiful graphic of equality of education for all I was able to use in the talk and share with hundreds of people, and as well as on the internet. And days before I gave the Brown lecture, I still had questions, and I remember emailing Superintendent Jones, and she emailed me back real quickly. She said she was in a workshop, but she was able to answer my questions. And I just hope that you weren't the presenter in that workshop. Pamela. So, Alice Piper, this is a story that you all know well, but it's a story that's been invisibilized in the historical record of public education in this country. 30 years before a young African-American schoolgirl named Linda Brown courageously walked into an all-white elementary school a few blocks from her home where she'd been denied access in Topeka, Kansas, 15-year-old Alice Piper, along with her family and 6 of her friends, made an equally courageous decision to challenge separate and unequal in public schooling for Native children. It was a bold act, it was a brave act, and it was a necessary act, for none of us would be gathered here today had not Alice Piper and this small group of families stood up against racial injustice. But this is not just a story of a past courageous act. I'd like to close with a few thoughts about why the Alice Piper story is even more important as it is today. For the President of the United States, one of the most important and longest lasting acts, decisions that he or she, someday there will be a she, will make, is the appointment of federal judges. Federal judges have to be nominated by the President, and they have to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. There are no constitutional qualifications to be a federal judge, even though federal judges' appointments are life appointments. Imagine that, getting a job for life with no stated qualifications for the job. Well, there are 870 federal judgeships in this country, and that includes 9 Supreme Court judges. At last count, there were 138 vacancies and 67 nominations pending. 13 of those nominations are in California. So here is the concern. Recently, there has been a very alarming trend, I believe, where nominees refuse to say that Brown v. Board was correctly decided and should not be overturned. This is happening at the highest level. A man named Jeffrey Rosen was recently appointed as the Deputy Attorney General. That's the second highest lawyer in the land. And he refused to affirm the Brown ruling. We can only wonder what they might say if we ask them about the Piper ruling. So, I want to urge us all, and especially the youth, to continue to look to the model of Alice Piper and Piper v. Big Pine in resisting these ominous trends. Her words and her actions are as important and as necessary today as they were 95 years ago when the doors of this public school opened for the first time to Native American students. With that, I want to congratulate the graduates, and I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for the incredible honor of driving you out.
But our family has ties to Alice Piper as well. Our late grandmother, Marjorie Piper, who recently passed, always talked about how that Alice Piper in her later years was a matron at her school, Carson City Indian School, the Stewart Indian School up in Carson City, Nevada. And she took a liking to our grandmother, Marjorie. And when the school days were done, there were times on the weekends where she'd call my grandma over and she'd say, come here, Marjorie. And then my grandma would go to her and she'd say, here, run to town for me and get us Pepsi and peanuts. So she'd get her little money, and my grandma would run to town, because Carson City is away from Stewart Indian School, if you're familiar with the area. But she'd go all the way to the town and get the little bottles of Pepsi, little peanuts, and then she would bring it back to her, and then they'd sit and visit, and then pour their peanuts and their Pepsi. and sit there and drink and eat it. I guess that's how they did it back in the day. They put peanuts in the cups. But that's how Alice Piper liked it, and our grandma liked it that way too. So I just wanted to teach that or share that with you, a little story from our family, and also in recognition of our grandmother who just passed. So that's how she is tied to all of this, and how we are, as a family, are involved with it all too. So again, I give thanks for this, but also got Robert Piper Jr. He's going to start us off with a traditional dance, and he's going to do just an honoring in that way. So while he's dancing, because he has eagle feathers, we're going to ask everybody to please stand while he's doing his dance. And then afterwards, I'm going to follow up with the hoop dance, and then that'll just be a good way of honoring her and recognizing that in a good way. And we give thanks for being here today. As I'm dancing, it's good to have good thoughts. Send them your way to your people. Send them out to all the people around that you know, your family members afar, those that are not able to be here. And just give good thoughts while you're doing this dance. And I'm doing it in recognition of Alice Piper. And our Tas Pueblo people, we call this the Tawaton. This is the traditional name of our dance, the Tawaton. And that's the hoop dance. And again, I make shapes of the things in the natural world with this dance. It's a creation story type dance. So I hope you all enjoy this and do it in a good way. Ooh.
future owes a favor to the past. Every step of human progress must be built upon the last. Every day has its awakening, even justice waits its time. Time was ready for Alice Piper, and she made her moment shine. California, end of summer, 1923. Into Big Pine Public High School, 7 students came to see if the flag outside the windows included everyone, but admission was denied. Alice Piper's time had come. Alice Piper's dream, how light and frail it seems, but now the world knows what it means to share in Alice Piper's dream. Some are certain things will worsen if they try to take a stand. It's an open invitation for every hardship known to man. Yes, the high road's steep and scary, and there is no guarantee. Alice Piper's quiet courage lifted all humanity. Alice Piper's dream, how light and frail it seems, but now the world knows what it means to share in Alice Piper's dream. We're living Alice Piper's dream.
Manahubu. That's it. Thank you.